Is it a bird? Is it a plane?
No, it's Mannimal.
We've got a sample out in front of us, for about 12 cases or so. We're probably not going to have time, even if the programme went on for several hours, to go through all of them. But as you say, we can maybe give us a flavour of some of the different species that have been recorded on the Isle of Man. So where's a good place to start?
Well, why don't we start with the puss moth? The reason I've brought this one to your attention is that, I had a personal encounter with one a little while ago. Well, two, as I should say. This is a pair of puss moths, a male and a female, mating. Wow. But they're not. It's not very enthusiastic. You know, they're just sat on it's during the day, so they're sat on a twig, end to end. And I think you can see from there, comparing this photograph that I've pulled out of this lovely furry white moth with black markings, with the cased specimen, you can see that they're totally different. And it's just really to point out that while it's nice to be able to see the wings spread out, it's very different from identifying something in the field where it's in its natural resting position.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
It's a beautiful moth, and it has a quite striking caterpillar, which is green and has markings at the front of its head and tail. Two long tails at the end of its body, and when it's disturbed, it rears up, and that's supposed to frighten or at least distract predators, presumably birds. And a few caterpillars do that, actually. For instance, one of the hawk moths, the big moths down here.
Mm-hmm. I have to tell you that. Wow, now these are much bigger. Now the puss moth was fairly sizable.
This is
these
super
are
stimulation. This is the elephant hawk moth, which is perhaps the commonest hawk moth on the Isle of Man. It's a lovely pink and olive green creature. Has a caterpillar which is about 8 or 9 centimetres long, and it's sort of generally grey colour, but with eye spots or what look like eye spots towards the front end. And again, it's another one that sort of rears up and frightens. It's supposed to frighten predators. In a past life, I've had people bring these to me thinking that they're snakes, actually, even though, they don't look anything like a snake. It's just that they have these eye spots at the front end.
Actually, designed to scare off unwanted attention.
Yeah, and then occasionally on the island we get the odd death's head hawk moth, which is very distinctive, and I think you can see that.
Now, I didn't realise they were over here. I was just about to say we don't get these surely on the Isle of Man.
Well, they're migrants. You just get the odd one or two. They don't survive the winter. And like the convolvulus hawk moth, which is this one underneath it, quite a big grey moth with a pink and black striped abdomen. These are migrants. They tend to come over in favourable conditions. It tends to be in the autumn. The death's head is particularly interesting because it, like you might expect, because of this sort of skull-shaped mark on its thorax.
On the back of the thorax.
That makes you think, well, death's head, okay. And when it is disturbed, it squeaks.
Wow,
it pushes
a squeaking moth, and that is impressive.
Now that's enough to give anybody, a bit of a start if you weren't expecting it. A squeaking moth. And so they're rather impressive moths, but you get attractive moths of all sizes, and for instance, another hawk moth which we're beginning to see more and more of here is the hummingbird hawk moth, which used to be just an immigrant, probably still is, but we have been seeing them at not just in the summer, we've been seeing them at other times of year, so we're beginning to wonder. And it has a very long tongue, and as its name suggests, it hovers over flowers and inserts its tongue into the flower to get nectar.
Yes. Now, I do have a friend who's seen one of these, because I think they only appear very briefly, but he runs a nursery in Douglas, and he says, not every year, but he says usually just for a couple of days, around about this time of the year, he sometimes gets these hummingbird hawk moths in, because at first he wondered what on earth it was when he saw it, and then asked around. And sadly, again, he said he'd give me a shout if we've seen them, and he hasn't seen one in the last year or so, but I've never seen one so close up, so they're fascinating things.
It's a bit like things like clouded yellow butterflies. You get good years and years when you don't see them at all. But they're rather nice, and they're a day-flying moth as well, so people can recognise these quite easily, and we get reports at the museum from time to time. Most moths are nocturnal, as you might expect, but there are a few day-flying ones. And,
which does make it a bit easier, because I suppose, again, most people usually associate moths out at night, round the lights, and the sort of ones we see, but there are some diurnal ones as well.
For instance, the... yes, we've got some males. The emperor moth, which is one that you see on heathland quite a lot. Very striking moth in that it's got an eye spot on all four wings. That's the two fore wings and the two hind wings. The female is a sort of delicate mixture of greys and soft browns and suffused with pink. The male has a bit more orange on it and is smaller. But the noticeable thing about the male is its antennae, which are very feathered. And there are a number of moth species where the males have these feathered antennae. You'll notice the female doesn't. And the reason for that is that these antennae are what they sense. They can smell females. They can smell them from up to about a mile away and home in on them. And you can occasionally see the males making a beeline, to a receptive female during the day. So that's another one that you might spot when you're out and about.
They are beautiful, and again, just looking at these, and if you saw one just out in the wild any time, you could easily mistake it for a butterfly. And someone said that to me the other day, saying, "Well, what's a butterfly and what's a moth? How do you distinguish between them?"
Well, I think the easiest way to distinguish them really is to look at the antennae, and all our butterflies have got clubbed antennae. Almost none of the moths have. A few of the burnet moths. Where are we?
So it's like a sort of antennae out, and then it's got the sort of the weight on the end, as it were, or the.
Yes, that's right.
There's some over here, I think. Wow, another case.
The only moths that have a sort of clubbed antennae are the burnet moths. Now they're another. The six-spot burnet moth is another day flyer.
That's stunning. That's
glossing iridescent black forewings with 6 red spots, as the name suggests, and scarlet hind wings.
They're incredible, aren't they? Look, they've been painted. It's amazing.
But they're totally different from any butterflies we've got. That you'd know them if you saw them. And they tend to occur in grassy places.
So look at the antennae. So by and large, as a rule of thumb, if they're clubbed, if they've got the sort of the extra weight, the sort of the thicker part at the end of the antennae, then it's probably going to be a butterfly. If they haven't, chances are it's a moth.
That's right. I mean, you can look at some of these moths and you think, well, the wings are a different shape. They're narrower, longer in proportion to the body, as opposed to butterflies, which have quite wide sheet-like wings. Mm-hmm. But if I just take you over here.
Yeah, just go down to one side down here.
There are some moths that look quite like butterflies. The magpie moth, for instance, which is a moth with a cream background and dark brown and orange spots. And that holds its wings a bit like a butterfly, and it's about the size of one of our smaller butterflies, say one of the wall butterflies. So it's not that easy. I mean, it is once you know your butterflies. We've got so few on the island that you can more or less, provide they stop for a little while, so that
long
you can
enough
actually,
you can.
Yeah, I mean, some butterflies can be very quick.
And I'm right around about 17 species, something is it on the island? A bit less, a bit more. Roughly.
I think you're
right. I won't hold you to it. In that area.
It's one of those things I'm really bad at, is remembering figures, like how many, whatever it is, have you got on the island, and I'll write it down somewhere, and then I'll put it, and I put it down, I'll forget it. It's around about that.
Yeah. It's the sort of one we're saying. It's you couldn't make a lifetime study out of the butterflies because there's just not enough species here. But
you can.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes, you can. Yes. there are.
So I'm corrected there.
Well, there are certainly endless aspects of their behaviour and conservation that you can focus on. So there's lots to see and study, even in a small group of insects like the butterflies.
Endless more variety in the moths, so you'd think there's.
Well, there are, and the thing I like about the moths, in particular, is the naming of them, the English names. I'm sorry, I don't know Manx names of moths. It would be nice to find out if anyone's had a crack at that.
Yes, it would be actually you and me both. I'm not too sure whether we've got Manx names for moths, but perhaps someone will write in and tell us.
I expect they will. But the English names are something that can provide a little bit of amusement. I suppose that naming grew like Topsy. You might see a moth and you think, right, well that's all sort of black and white, so we'll call that one a magpie moth. Or we've got a huge moth and it's very fast flying, manoeuvrable. We'll call that a hawk moth. But then you'll get things like a very evocative names like angle shades or peach blossom or pebble hook tip, and you just try and think of what's going through the mind of the person who thought up that name. It can also be incredibly confusing because there are some drab brownish moths of the family Noctuidae, which is a huge family actually, and one is called brown line bright eye, and another one is called bright line brown eye, or something like that.
Nightmare, yeah. Designed to catch out the unwary.
That's right. I mean, you can see that we've got a tray full of brownish moths here. And I look at my crib sheet because I can't remember what all the Latin names are, but we've got double square spot, square spotted clay, small square spot rustic. So, I mean, Ian Scott will know all of these like the back of his hand, but I'm afraid I have quite a lot of trouble remembering what's what. And of course, only some of these might be not found in the Isle of Man anyway.
I rather like the rustic. So you've got a northern rustic, the Ashworth's rustic, the autumnal rustic, the six-striped rustic, and then rather sadly, underneath there's the neglected rustic.
I know, it's wonderful. And what on earth is a cetaceous Hebrew character? I mean,
that's a stunning name.
Hebrew character, I can imagine, looks something like something out of a Hebrew alphabet, but what's cetaceous about it?
The mind boggles, doesn't it?
Not part of my vocabulary.
But just looking at the moths out here now, again, I think most people think moths, and they just think, little things that flit around the lights at night, or maybe the clothes moth you might see cheerfully laying its grubs on your clothing. But they always have a bit of a reputation of being rather drab and a bit dreary, and not a great deal about them. But you actually see them laid out like this, which is the great joy of doing something like this, albeit obviously they're no longer alive, but you really do get the idea of the range of size and colours. I mean, we've got everything here from bright reds to browns to blacks to yellows to you name it. I mean, the whole gamut of colours are represented. Incredible. Oh, hang on, what's this now? What's this? Moths count event. So there is a moth thing coming up.
Well, since we're interested in moths at the minute, and you might be going out on a moth trapping night, there's also something that the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry is organising on the 20th of June. They've got a public free one-day course introducing moths and their identification. And it's at Knockhalo Farm. So that's on Saturday the 20th of June, if I'm allowed to advertise a little bit. But it's an opportunity for anyone who's say, thinking of getting into finding out about moths.
Wants to know a bit more.
Yeah. So booking's essential, and I suppose the easiest thing to do is to, if anyone's interested, to contact me or Richard Selman at DAF at Knockhalo.
That's terrific, and you don't need to be an expert to go along.
You don't. No.
Just have an interest.
This is simply to introduce people to moths and maybe to sing their praises a little bit and show people that they're much more interesting perhaps than they originally thought.
Absolutely, yeah. And you won't be tested at the end of the day.
No. I'm sure you won't.
People always get up. Well, that's a fascinating thing. So that's coming up, Saturday the 20th of June. So that's certainly a chance to find out a bit more.
But it's part of an initiative that's going on throughout the British Isles to record moths and find out what the up-to-date situation is with all the distributions of the different species. Because there's a a fear that there might be that populations might be reducing, that certain species might be losing their habitat. It's the usual sort of fear of loss of biodiversity. But conversely, that we know that some species are moving north and west and might get across to the Isle of Man, which weren't here before. So it's an exercise that hopefully would capture the imagination of lots of people, not just the established moth experts, but perhaps some interested amateurs as well.
Sure, and I think there was something in some of the papers, the national papers I'm talking about, not the Isle of Man papers, quite recently about some moth species turning up in Britain which hitherto hadn't been seen, and it's getting back again, rather like lichens and mosses. They're quite a useful indicator species for real changes particularly in climate, I suppose.
Yes, and like butterflies, butterflies are also thought to be useful indicator species. They seem to show changes in their distribution patterns quite quickly with change and change in climatic conditions. Now, although you can draw too many conclusions, you can jump to conclusions and associate a pattern of distribution with global warming or whatever. It isn't necessarily the case. There needs to be a bit more rigorous science to prove that. But the indications are that there is a link with the changes in temperature and what that brings in terms of weather, and perhaps extending the season for breeding, which is one way, of course, that a species can spread northwards. It can get perhaps another brood out in the summer, and that increases population that way.
And again, so it's another one of these fascinating aspects in that studies of things like moths, and occasionally people might say, well, either, I suppose, why, some people might ask if they're not interested, or people might be regarded as relative anoraks, like sort of trained spotters of the natural world. But it's amazing how often that there is a sort of much part of a much bigger picture of studying anything like some of the smaller insects, the moths, the butterflies, that can really give you a sort of litmus test, as it were, on the state of the environment in many ways.
Yes, and they're also extremely
interesting
to
right.
study. Yes, that's right. Yes. Yeah.
And now, you said at the beginning that these broadly are macro moths, which by implication suggests there might be micro moths, which you mentioned. Have we got any of those?
Yes, I've brought out a box of micro moths.
And by micros, micro is going to be micro, and oh my goodness, yes. You see, we do have from micro to mini micro. See, this is incredible. A little small tray that Kate's got now, and some of these, I can tell you, are, well, if you saw it, you might think it was a gnat or a mosquito. Some of them smaller than your little fingernail. Absolutely incredible one there, which can't be more than 2 millimetres, wingspan of 3 millimetres, 4 millimetres maximum, I think, up to some slightly bigger ones. But these are absolutely tiny, some of them. It's amazing that people could ever actually collect and identify some of these. Yes,
but they are they include some of the more economically important species like clothes moths and leaf miners. Tortrix moths that perhaps the larvae burrow into fruit blossom and that sort of thing. So there is a point to studying them and identifying them. The range is quite enormous. There are a large number of families. We don't have anywhere near a representative collection of micro moths. This particular one is on loan to us from an Irish entomologist who keeps topping up the micro moth boxes that he brings to us. Mm-hmm. But it's incredibly important that this work's being done, I think, because, like as you suggest, there are far fewer people studying this end of the spectrum of moths. It's a very artificial division anyway.
I was going to say whether it's not presumably sort of zoologically accepted. It's just a broad swipe. Is it macro and micro?
Yeah, there are. The micro moths encompasses the families that are smaller, sure, but they're also more difficult to study, more difficult to identify. They tend not to have English names so much. Most of them have got just scientific names.
The Latin.
And they're not, some of them are just not easy to find, easy to collect. So the macro moths are the ones that appealed more immediately to early collectors, and the micro moths are the ones that we feel include the important species.
Mm-hmm. But a bit more difficult, I suppose. At least with the macro moths, you can see that people might be more fascinated. Some of these aren't so small that you are getting into a real, almost a specialism within a specialism, I suppose.
Yes, in a way. I think that some of the tinier moths are much more difficult to identify, and that really is a genitalia extraction job. Yeah. But you can look at some of the larger ones are not so different from the smaller macro moths.
Absolutely.
There's a brown house moth here, which is about the size of a pug, one of the macro moths, or one of the smaller noctuid moths. So it's not clear cut at all.
No,
the division's not clear cut. You have to have reasonable familiarity with the families that are plugged in the micro moths section, and the families that are macro moths.
So there you go, just a taster, and it literally is just a taster, looking at some of the species that are actually stored here. Plenty more not available, at least certainly not on display today, but a fairly massive collection, but by no means comprehensive within the museum, and hundreds more out and about. So a chance to think a little bit more about them. Maybe go out and take a look. Plenty of books on the subject. I see one over here on moth identification. I've got a little one in my backpack normally, which is nowhere near as fancy as that, but you can get little gem guides and such like. So it's very easy to get some little books just to give you some hints and tips on what's going on. And then, of course, the course coming up on the 20th. So if you fancy taking a look at that, what a great opportunity to speak to someone who really knows what they're talking about. So the Radio 1 question, you got a favourite among them?
Oh, right. Well, I certainly like the puss moth.
Yeah, I rather like.
A really gorgeous moth. There are some metallic coloured ones, like the burnished brass, which is rather fine, metallic green colour.
He is beautiful,
iridescent.
Yeah, that really is. Even
colour,
here you can see the sort of the iridescence off the leaf, off the wing. Fantastic.
I don't know. If you asked me tomorrow, I'd have a different choice.
One every day.
Yes.
Enough for a lifetime of study. So get out. Why not go and take a look out? It's one of those things that's so easy just to think nothing of them and think, it's just a moth. But like all these things, there's far more to it than meets the eye.